Welcome to the Connected Enterprise Podcast. This is Carl Lewis, your host from Vision33, and my guest today is Matthew Sitter. Matt, welcome to the podcast. Start us off by telling us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Thanks, Carl. Excited to be here. Currently, I do executive coaching. I run a global CEO network. I think a lot about leadership development and how networks operate. And I feel like I came by this in an interesting, meandering path, but it all makes sense in the end. It all starts with my athletic experience, actually. High school athlete, played water polo, played on very, very good teams, national champions when I was in high school. And I am not a big guy. I'm 5'8". If you know anyone who plays water polo, usually you got to be probably 6 inches plus taller than me to really get where you got to go. And what that said to me was that I really had to pay attention to how I could make the team better in different ways. How can I support what everyone else has to do? And that was really my first experience in terms of thinking like, hey, all right, how do I impact how the team as a whole operates? As I was going through my career, I determined I wanted to be related to healthcare systems in a lot of ways because healthcare system in the United States, there's some challenges there. I thought there was ways to help make it better. So after business school, I had a variety of jobs in healthcare. And the common thread on all those is I was managing people that I did not share any of their functional expertise. I had nurses, dietitians, software developers, medical billers. I could not have micromanaged them if I wanted to, and it still seemed to go pretty well. I was managing a lot by objective, but really helping the team to operate. In 2012, I got the opportunity to go work for an organization called the McChrystal Group, founded by General Stanley McChrystal and a number of his aides. He had been in charge of Joint Special Operations Command as well as the war in Afghanistan. And they had been doing some really interesting things in terms of how they were empowering people and making sure that they could coordinate these highly trained groups of people to be doing the same things. And they were applying that into the private sector. I was there largely as a business translator, but I learned a ton while I was there. I became an executive coach while I was there, thought a lot about how changing behavior of leaders within an organization could make a difference. And we had a number of former defense intelligence analysts who really got me interested in how networks work, network science, network analytics, and thinking about how we can impact our own lives by thinking about the networks that we're in. Fast forward to 2021, what we saw with the pandemic was everyone's talking the same way you and I were now. You're on a Zoom, it could be someone down the street, it could be someone halfway across the world. What it does was it shrank our world a lot, but allowed us to be connected to people who we would not otherwise be connected to. And I really think that the best way to think about innovation is you learn a lot by integrating the ideas of people who are different than yourself, diverse in experience, expertise, and perspective. So my goal is to bring people like that together to help them solve the challenges that are coming up from them, but also uncover entirely new opportunities.
That's quite a story and a great background. And no one ever has to justify their background to me, by the way, because I started out as a theologian and ended up in technology with a stop in a couple of other places in the middle. So it's always interesting, totally different topic for another day. The value of your college education in terms of where you start, where you end up. It's kind of like, maybe not.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of
Yeah,
twists and turns, but I do think that people don't end up in the job that they're in by accident. There's something
right.
that drove them there, and there's a reason why they're a fit.
Absolutely would agree with that. Matt, some of that background is exactly why I wanted to talk to you about the changing role of a CEO, because as you can definitely see in your line of work, there's been a lot of changes that have happened. And a lot of people think the role of a CEO has changed dramatically, or at least the future outlook for the role of a CEO has changed dramatically as a result of the pandemic and many of the changes that a lot of them managed their way through in the last couple of years. How do you see that as being true, not true?
Well, I think there's definitely some changes that occurred as a result of the pandemic. Maybe just thinking about the role generally first. There's three things that when I'm talking to CEOs that I think is very, very important for them to focus on, ways to conceive of themselves. One is that they're the chief dot connector within the business. They've got this different altitude than everyone else within the business. They're taking information from all sorts of different places, both internal and external. And they're helping people understand, hey, here's where your place is on what we're doing, or here's what our organization actually does within the marketplace. How can I help folks understand how they actually are impacting what we're doing or what our company is doing? Very much related to that, I like folks to think about themselves as head of market intelligence. Okay, again, this idea of you've got a different altitude on what you're doing, and you've got this idea on like, hey, here's where we fit in the marketplace. That's not information that everyone within your organization has, and it needs to be shared. And I would say, importantly, people outside the organization, if they can understand how you conceive of what the marketplace is overall, it makes you a more trusted source, more trusted supplier to them in whatever you're selling. If you've got this idea on like, hey, here's how the world works and here's how we help you thrive within that. And then the last one that I like to think about is that they should be the head of people. That is kind of all encompassing, really thinking about culture and things like that. But the people that you hire, that is your most leverageable asset. The more that you can get out of the people that work for you, the more that they understand what they're trying to get done, the more you are likely to achieve heights than you would otherwise. You've got to be using people the best way you can. And people are often a fount of untapped potential. So, how you can get at that potential is really important. A lot of that flows from the culture and the environment you create, but also how you're actually helping them understand the information, which is the lifeblood of the network within your business.
About a week ago, I was talking to a CEO friend of mine, and I asked him to give me the difference between his role and other key managers in his organization. He says, well, if we were all photographers, I'm a landscape guy. I take pictures of panoramas. The people who work for me, they're like portrait photography, somebody who takes close-ups of flowers, somebody else who's focused on animals. And all of them combined give me all the information that I need at a much deeper level than the panorama that I can take.
I think that makes a ton of sense. Being that integrative thinker, so they've got to see what the whole landscape is, but if they're able to supply that information in, but also be able to play back to the guy who's taking a picture of the rabbit, hey, this is actually how it falls into the greater picture. They're going to do a much better job taking that picture of the rabbit next time.
Yeah, if we don't take care of the rabbit, look what's going to happen to the rest of it.
Right.
Exactly. CEO is one of the things that amazed me through my business experience is that I've had CEOs that come from all different types of backgrounds. One of them was a youth minister before he became a CEO. That was kind of a family thing. One was like an operations manager who'd been with the company for a while and just really exceeded at things. One was a salesperson, and one was an accountant. But it
Right.
seems like there may be some traditional paths, but there are always some untraditional ones that come to the
Absolutely. Yeah.
surface who are really good at it. It seems like they would have to share kind of a common skill set of some sort. Do you have a list of things that you can think typical men and women that become CEOs would carry with them?
There's an infinite number of ways to succeed. If everyone tried to lead like Elon Musk, they would fail. He's got these own unique experiences, expertise, access to resources that we don't have. And so when
Right.
you're thinking about how you're going to lead, you have to figure out what is going to be the thing that is authentic to you and what actually takes advantage of the strengths that you've got. They do have to figure out how to surround themselves with people who will complement what they've got. There's going to be all these strengths that they have. How can I actually make sure that I've got the right sort of folks that are around me and not rely solely on me as the person? If you're going to scale it all, you've got to work through people. Now, there's all sorts of different ways to work through people. You've got to figure out what the style is. I do think it's critical for CEOs and anyone who wants to aspire to greater things. You should be a student of human behavior in some way, and you ought to be a student of communication. There's so much that can go wrong with miscommunication that's out there, but we have a lot of different ways that we can think about communicating. We've got email, we've got text, we've got Zoom. There's all these different things, and they all have different advantages that are around them. How you're using them for the proper ROI, I think, is critical. There's this unique aspect of the leader that they're always on stage as well. People are paying attention, they're interpreting all sorts of stuff about them. And in the absence of information, people will definitely make stuff up. And so they've got to be thinking about, hey, what's the message that I'm actually trying to communicate there? And how am I letting people know what's important? I talk a lot about when you think about a meeting, that is absolutely the most expensive form of communication that you can come up with. You got to coordinate getting people there. You got to be ready to interact. You got to be ready to respond to each other. Usually there's inputs and outputs that come out of it. You multiply that when you've got an all hands meeting or something like that, hyper expensive meeting. So many people in one place at one time. You ought to be communicating things that are very, very important to the business and tell people the reason why we're talking about these things is that they're a priority. There's one common thread around what I think a leader has to pay attention to is what's the value of their communication and how are they making sure that people understand the vision, the direction that you're trying to head towards.
So many thoughts come to mind, but I will say that I've got a customer long enough to become a friend in my hometown. Elmer Seeley is his name. And just like his name sounds, he's just kind of a good, quaint, matter of fact. If a farmer can be a CEO of a book company, that's Elmer. The unique thing about Elmer is he's 100% genuine. He is himself. and he leads like himself. He's a joy to be around because of that. And I think his employees just love this guy because he's so genuine in the way he runs his business. A buddy of mine used to quote can't remember who the author was, but he talked about Mr. Inside and a Mr. Outside. That if you as a CEO were Mr. Outside, you needed to find as your first employee a value. If you
Right.
were Mr. Inside, you needed to find Mr. Outside
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it was almost like that was your other hand that you didn't know
Right.
how to use as well. I think you said it. It's like it builds a team. He or she builds a team. It's one of the key things that they all do for sure. In my daily work, I've got 4 or 5 things on a weekly basis that I do on a repetitive basis. My keynotes, the thing, I got to get these done. I have to keep these on track. What is that like for a CEO?
Well, I do think it differs from person to person. The thing that I emphasize a lot with folks is that there's a tendency to think that structure decreases flexibility. I would say think about structure to where it increases your flexibility. Those things that you should be doing again and again and again, you're actually putting structure around it to give you flexibility in those other parts of your schedule. We only have so much energy that we've got, or so much cognitive force that we can apply in a given day. How are you thinking about the structure that you've got around what you're trying to do? And again, when we're thinking about all these leaders being unique in some way, shape, or form, there's different things that they may need to focus on what they do and where they need to create structure around it. The idea, I would say, as well, is where you put structure in place, it's supposed to give you leverage. It's not giving you leverage, it's just bureaucracy. And so, what are those structure things that are going to allow you to have a multiplier effect on what you're trying to do?
For a long time, I used to fight scheduling things because I felt like my calendar would just fill up with all this stuff. And it finally dawned on me one day that if I was really smart about this, I basically could learn to structure and schedule my free time also.
Yeah.
So I started putting in the big important things, and then it was easier to say no to other things.
I was working with a CFO of a big tech company at one point, and he was like, I'm tired of playing defense with my calendar because it basically
Yeah.
anyone could lob something in. You're
Mm.
making the choice on whether to accept or not accept. He wanted to start playing offense around it. So it's like, all right, then what do you want to accomplish? And I would say that's one of the analogies that people can think about is like, hey, if I have these things that I've got to accomplish, how am I taking control of those things first within my calendar and limiting where I can be a receptacle for what other people are trying to accomplish?
Anybody who's been an employee ever in their life, maybe more than one places, if you're fortunate enough to be at the same place, that must mean you really like it. Been almost 20 years in this industry in only 2 places. One just kind of led to the other. So I've considered that really fun. I've had CEOs that I really, really liked. They were just fun to be around and they spent time with their staff. In the changing world that you talked about, it's difficult to get everybody together, an all hands meeting. I think a lot of CEOs in days past just sort of did it casually. When I'm coming to work in the morning and I walk in the door, I just kind of walk through the plant and I say hello and
Yeah.
talk to everybody and I try to learn everybody's names over time. I had one CEO that knew at least 1,000 employees' names. Just say hello to them
Great.
personally.
Yeah.
It was just a gift that he maximized to its largest extent that you could ever imagine. That's difficult in the middle of a pandemic. I think it's more difficult when you have people working remote. One leader friend of mine said, we've grown through the pandemic. I used to know everybody in the company and I used to be able to meet them when we hired them. It was all centralized. Now it's all decentralized. And he says, things happen and I don't even know that we hired 10 new people last month. They just make stuff happen. They had to change their HR policies so that not only the CEO, but everybody else in the company started getting announcements that
Right.
here are the new hires, right? And where they are and what they're going to be doing. How important is it for a CEO to really be aware and in touch to some degree or another, the entire staff, that sort of all hands meeting concept?
Your friend that you were talking about, the fact that people are getting hired without them knowing, things like that, that means they're scaling. That means that he's not actually being a speed bump for everyone else, which I would count as being a good thing. One thing that we saw during the pandemic, transactional communication went up overall. And when I say transactional communication, it's like when you go to order a cup of coffee at Starbucks, I order a cup of coffee, I give them money, I'm expecting to get the coffee back. I can determine very easily the success of that transaction. Did I get it fast and did I get what I wanted? But what we saw with the pandemic, everyone working from home, is you would say, I need something. That's the reason why I'm reaching out to something, or they need something from me. And so that's why they're reaching out to me. And we could tell on that communication if it was successful. Did I get what I need and did I get it fast? In any individual circumstance, transactional communication will be more efficient. But if you take the totality of those communications over time, you're actually wearing down the context that someone has and the ability for them to understand what's going on. When I order a cup of coffee at Starbucks, they actually don't care if I was thirsty and water would have been the better solution for me. They just care about what I ordered. And so you remove the ability for people to take initiative if you are not driving that context out there. I brought up this idea earlier of the CEO being chief dot connector. They've got to consistently be thinking about what are those dots that they're trying to connect for other people and how they can help put them in the right spot to do what they need to. There is a tremendous amount of value. If you think about, you don't get a lot more time. You can't create more time. If the way that they're spending time, they're saying, hey, I want to make sure that I am spending time with some of the individuals within the company, that actually should be seen as a substantive cost. And it means that they're actually placing a lot of value on the people that they're working with. So helping people understand, like, I am spending time with you because it is important, so you can understand where we're going.
Yeah, I'm a big advocate of at least once a year trying to have some kind of all hands meeting where the CEO communicates directly to the staff, just in terms of general direction or what we think is happening in the industry to the economy and things like that.
I'm a
Speaking
fan
about
of
the economy,
connecting overall. One of the things that's interesting, sorry to interrupt, when I was working at McChrystal Group, one of the things that we talked about that they did with Joint Special Operations Command is they created something called the Operations and Intelligence Meeting. This meeting, it was 9,000 people. It happened every day for 90 minutes. And it was a video teleconference call. Okay, so that is a massive expense, right? And the only reason they did that is because there was so much changing in their daily operating movements that a lot of people had to know this information. So I would never recommend that a company does this. They can think about some periodicity around it, but it was highly choreographed as well. And so when General McChrystal was speaking to someone, they actually were able to extend his value even further, because when you're thinking about the way you and I are interacting, you can get pretty close to me, closer than you probably could get to a star on a regular basis. But if you're getting this close, you're getting the feeling that you're actually with them. He
yep,
would say the person's name who he was talking to, like, Carl, great to meet you. He'd be briefed ahead of time. He'd know that he'd have to say hi to Carl. Carl's like, hey, I had this interaction. And all of Carl's friends are like, oh, he got to talk to Matt. And so this actually can extend the capability of the leader as well, where they feel like there's a halo effect on who has actually connected with you. So it's not just with a CEO in this all hands environment, him talking to everyone. Yes, very, very important. If he's able to actually show the interaction that he's having with individuals as well, that can extend their capability. That can make it so that they are seen more accessible.
that's a really good point. People aren't just listening to what you say, they're watching what you do. If you are visually warm and cordial to this one staff person, that extends to other staff people as they make a judgment and see value in the style and that sort of thing. So that's really a good note. The world continues to change and the economy continues to kind of give people fits, or, maybe not, who knows? What are things that CEOs are doing today to kind of keep themselves well informed, tracking what's happening globally with our economy, and how do I lead this business?
Maybe one note on change in general. Without change, without constrained resources, there's not innovation. I always like to say that change is where opportunity happens. And you've got to
Mhm.
be figuring out how to actually take advantage of that change. When we think about the most innovative ideas that come out there, typically they are coming from people who are integrators of thought. So they have networks of people where they're connected to someone who is unconnected to someone else in their network. They've got this diversity of thoughts that are coming at them. They can be getting these ideas from people who have specific focuses, areas of expertise themselves, and they're actually able to bring these things together. So you need this diverse network to be able to pull on, hey, how am I solving different problems that are out there? And I would say intellectual curiosity is something that is generally of value. Is like, hey, how am I understanding the world and what's going on? Where can I get my information from? Am I reading a variety of different sources that are out there, not just sticking to one particular trade magazine or something like that? Because you can learn from folks in other industries quite well. There was one CEO that I worked with, ran a brewery, another one running a SaaS company. The guy from the SaaS company talked about customer acquisition cost as the most important metric that he was using. The person at the brewery had never thought about customer acquisition cost as a metric that they should be using, but they were able to change how they thought about their marketing strategy as a result of being connected to someone who they otherwise would not have been connected to.
Very interesting. A brewery would even think like that, but I could see where it would work for sure.
Yeah.
If you could pick one staff person that a CEO ought to really be absolutely in step with, Who would that be?
So I think it depends on the size and type of the organization, depends on the capabilities of the CEO. There's a couple positions that I find pretty interesting out there because they are so broadly defined. That's the COO and chief of staff, right? There's all sorts of things that they could be doing, but there's not a lot you could say that they shouldn't be doing. And so how that actually complements what the CEO has got going on. And then there's other like very strictly functional positions. Like the CFO, you understand what their job is pretty well. CHRO, you understand what their job is pretty well. Head of sales. What I think the goal is in terms of when you're thinking about your leadership team within an organization is that they should ultimately feel accountable, not just to you as the leader of the organization, but accountable to one another. If they're feeling accountable to one another, they're going to be a lot more likely to supply information to one another, helping folks look around the corner rather than, some of the rivalries that typically come up within an organization, like between sales and finance, where the sales guys, oh, they just try and like sell whatever they can. They don't care about margin. The finance guys are the ones who always say no, right? And it's like they both think that they're protecting the organization in some way. How do you
Yep.
help them feel accountable to one another?
Sometimes our staff, they learn their part of the business really, really well without a great appreciation for the other pieces and or what their stresses are also. So
Yeah.
having them learn a little bit about each other. I worked for one guy that insisted that all of us kind of in these vice president chairs, we spent time with each other, doing each other's work so that we could gain an appreciation for that.
Sure.
It's kind of where I learned accounting by doing somebody else's job.
Right, right.
And-
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and-
You probably didn't end up being the best accountant there ever was out of it,
oh
but you
no.
probably became better at your job as a result because you could understand, hey, here's what they need from me, or here's what I can supply to them, or what they can give to me that'll make me better.
I was head of sales selling ERP software, which is all about accounting. My focus was really more kind of the operational side of it. Knowing more about accounting definitely helped when you were meeting with the CFO of a prospect. So
Right.
learning those other disciplines to a degree can really be helpful. And I think that can help with that accountability factor you were talking about for sure. We're looking into the future here. Last thing I'll ask you today. Right now, when CFOs look out into the future, what are they seeing and what are the stuff that causes them to stay up at night?
There's all sorts of things that can. I would say like some of the things that have created greater uncertainty on what we got is when you're thinking about inflation in the global economy. All right, how much are things going to cost? We saw substantial disruption in the supply chain. How can I actually gain some control around what we're doing? And so they've got to constantly be looking at. There's going to be different things that they're worried about at a given point in time. What's the critical thing that's going to help them? Some of the tools that I think that we ought to be not afraid of, but figuring out how we can use. And the only way you can get there is experience. There's two things that I would think about relative to this. One is things like ChatGPT. All right, it's this incredible thing where you can be producing all sorts of stuff. In order to figure out what you can do with it, you got to get some experience around it. Have it write a haiku for you or produce some sort of thing that is going to help you out in your work. Get some experience with it because you need to demystify yourself on it and then hear how other people are using it as well. And then the second thing that I really think that CEOs ought to be thinking about is their talent portfolio. Usually we've thought about people as being like full-time employees or contractors within the business, but now we've got a much broader portfolio that we can think about. You got full-time, you got part-time, you got contractors, you got gig workers, you got all these different types of people that they may be generationally different. Younger folks may be more attracted to the idea of gig work. All right, what are these types of employees that could be in your portfolio? What are they actually well suited towards doing? And how do you optimize against that? The only way you can do that is trying to get experience around it and understanding how you would work with these folks. So even if you don't understand exactly how you would use a gig worker, experiment around that so you can say like, hey, I actually understand how this can work and how we may be able to put them to use in the future.
I could even combine those two ideas for you. I've done this with interns previously, but it might be a better opportunity to do it with a gig worker, something like ChatGPT. You want to know how it could possibly help our business? Well, hire an intern to help you figure it out, right?
Right.
They'll probably be better at technology than an older person you could stick on the job and won't necessarily be afraid of it, but be excited about it. And or hire a gig worker who's very technical to come in and
Sure.
kind of, hey,
Sure. Yeah.
for the next 6 weeks, I want you to just investigate and find out ways that our business might be able to use ChatGPT.
You can access someone with expertise in a way that you probably couldn't before. Like
exactly.
thinking, how am I
And
going
they
to
can
do it?
be anywhere in the world, right? And do that
Right.
type of stuff for you,
For
right?
sure. For
Doesn't matter.
sure.
Hey, this has been interesting. It must be some fun to get to work with these CEOs in a network fashion and have
It's
these kind of
cool.
conversations all the time.
Yeah, and I like to tell people it's very intellectually stimulating, right? I'm getting to hear some of the most interesting things that they're thinking about and some of the best solutions that they come up with.
Absolutely. I sit on a couple of committees. Everybody's an owner of a business in this one group I belong to, except me. I'm sort of a privileged, trusted employee that sits there with all of these business owners. It's fascinating at times to just listen to the different ways they approach things, and
Sure.
all of them with tremendous legitimacy. There's no bad ideas in the room.
There you
That's
go.
for sure. Well, thank you, Matt. This has been a pleasure. Some good information here from my audience, which, as I've shared with you, are a lot of small business owners, a lot of CEOs that are all over the map from very small companies to pretty significant ones, whether we call them presidents, owners, single operators, or whatever they may be. They all have the same challenges, just at a bigger scale. These discussions are valuable, I'm sure. So thanks again for being here on
Well,
the
I really
Connected
enjoyed it.
Enterprise.
Thanks for the time.
Yeah, you're welcome. And to everyone else, we hope you tune in again in another couple of weeks for the next episode of the Connected Enterprise. Stay connected.